Good day, students. This presentation focuses on ways in which you can enhance thinking in your learners. Now, there are different terms that people use for enhancing thinking. The one could be critical thinking. Others speak about higher order thinking, which I'm sure you've heard about when you were introduced to Bloom's taxonomy. Others speak about deep thinking as opposed to superficial thinking. So when you are trying to get your students to think more deeply, there are different things that you need to consider. For example, you need to think about the purpose of the activity that you're involving your learners with. You need to provide a context for that activity, maybe a particular scenario or a particular discipline or subject that you are teaching. You need to think about developing their rational reasoning skills. Now, many scholars refer to such skills as the ability to interpret things, to analyze content maybe, to evaluate certain aspects of the subject, and then to be able to explain or justify those aspects. For example, when you look at the term interpret, it could mean very different things in different subjects. You could interpret a poem in a language class, or you could interpret a graph of a budget in a business studies class. So interpret might mean different things, but the process is about being able to analyze something and being able to reach some kind of conclusion using evidence and providing examples logically and reasonably. But some people say that that's not enough. You also need to have a disposition or an attitude to make people think more deeply. And in order to do this, you have to want people to strive for truth, for clarity, for accuracy, and for fairness, among many other things. The term reflexive practice I've introduced already, and this is about thinking about certain things in order to make considered choices and decide on actions that you've actually thought about more deeply. Now, the teacher has to think about the pedagogy that you will use when introducing your learners to certain content. And there are two aspects that you need to think about, which I've already introduced you to in a previous occasion. The one is epistemological, and this is related to the content and the knowledge of the subject. And the other is methodological. This is related to the processes involved in acquiring and developing that knowledge. For example, scientists might use experiment as a method to develop knowledge, but it is not the only method in science. Business studies people might use graphs and tables to try and understand what is happening, let's say, in a budget. So that would be the method that they employ in order to get new knowledge. So what are the class activities that you need to give your learners to make them think more deeply? It has to be challenging, yet attainable. That means that you've got to think about possibly the grade in which they're at, their age, their background knowledge, and so on, in order to try and develop the understanding around the subject, maybe think about ways in which they can apply that knowledge, maybe think about ways in which they can analyze the content, think about ways in which they can reflect on the content by using the theory in that particular subject, or reflect on the content by using their own experience. And then you can also think of possibly other ways in which you can challenge them to think more deeply. A very typical method used by the teacher in the classroom is questioning. And you need to think about how you question your learners so that they can think more deeply. The one big question that is actually very important is the why question. Another might be in which way. For example, give me an example. Why are you saying what you are saying, and in which way does this work? There's the what if question. What if things look a little differently? What if things are concluded in a different kind of way? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Why? And then again, there might be other ways in which you can ask questions. So, the teacher can help the learners to engage with concepts more deeply by creating an environment that encourages participation. For example, if the child is going to be too scared to talk in class or to ask questions or to make inputs, that's not a very good environment that is conducive to learning. Allow learners to justify their choices. Again, the why question. Give me a reason for your answer. Why are you saying that? Create scenarios that contextualize the concept, maybe using a case study or a problem that needs to be solved, and at the same time encourage logical reasoning. Now, what I'd like to do now is to talk a little bit about multiple choice questions, which are used quite often in a classroom setting in different subjects. The one I'm presenting here is taken from technology or physics, and it is to do with an electrical or an electronic component. So this here, the question is, the component below is an example of. So here, if you've done this in the class and you've shown the student this in class, then it's a matter of recall. So that is why I say that it is a very basic question. You're giving them the 4 options and the child will choose the correct option, which in this case is the resistor. But you can take the learner to a multiple choice question that is a little more challenging. For example, here you give them 4 components and you're asking them which of these components are both polar. So the learner in this case needs to have some understanding of what is meant by polar and then be able to identify which ones of these are polar. Definitely a more challenging question. This one is even more challenging, where you provide the learner with a circuit. This is a moisture sensor circuit with various components, and you ask what happens when the probes detect moisture. So here the learner needs to have a complete understanding of how the circuit works, what the components are in the circuit. There's a transistor, there's a resistor, there's an LED, and so on. And then look at the 3 options that are given and decide, having analyzed the diagram, which of these is the correct option. Definitely more challenging. But all these 3 questions that I've given you are typically applicable within a grade 9 classroom. So, your task for the week. I'd like you to work with someone in one of your majors and devise an easy multiple choice question and a more challenging multiple choice question and post that in our chat group. You can also consult your CAPS documents, because in many of the CAPS documents they speak about higher order learning or higher order thinking skills. And then I'll see you next week, or you'll hear from me next week. Thank you very much.